I want to do one right now where we're actually going to have to save a value. And what this is going to look like, it's going to look a lot like when we do an analog or digital read. What we're going to do is we're going to go read our pin, right? We're going to go find this function. It's going to find the function. It's going to pass this 0 into here. So it'll go read pin 0. And whatever it reads, what we have to do is we have to save it into memory. We have to assign it somewhere. So we make space for it, and we have to save it in memory so that I can use it somewhere down here. Maybe I could do if val, something like that. Right? So I could do something like this, and I need to save it so that I can use it later. Otherwise, I don't remember it. If I just do this, well, it does take the reading, but that value is not saved anywhere. So what we want to do is we want to figure out how to make something where we can save a value. So here's my template, and I could even put in here data type, put 1, comma, something like that. So here's my template here. I need to give my function a data type, and in this case it can't be a void. It needs to be the thing that I want to save. And right now, let's just call it an integer. I might need to change that later, but we'll see if an integer works. And then I want to give it a name. And right now, I'm just going to call it funct, for function. And if I need inputs, I'll end up putting them in here, as many as I need. But for right now, what I want to do is I want to take a reading of my potentiometer, and then I want to, let's say, double it and return that value. So I want to know what twice my potentiometer reading is. First thing I need to do down here is I need to figure out, well, how do I take my potentiometer reading first? How would I get twice my potentiometer reading? Don't worry about that it's in a function or it's not my loop. Just write the code the way that you would write it anywhere else. So in this case, what I need to do is I need to save a spot. We'll call it pot val. And I need to save this spot, or I need to save into this spot the reading of my potentiometer. And to read my potentiometer, it's an analog read of pin 0. Now again, since this is a function, I want to keep this pretty broad. What if I didn't plug it into pin 0? What if I plugged it into pin 5? We want to use a variable here, so I'm going to call this my A pin for my analog pin. This is the thing that can change. I need to put that up here. That's my input. A pin also needs a data type. What type of data should I use for A pin? Well, it's a number 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. A byte would probably be one of the better ones to use. As of right now, I can't think of anything else we'd need to put in here for an input. Let's move down here. So what do we need to do to double it? There are some simple ways to do this. I'm going to do this in a more long drawn out way so that we can exactly see what's happening. We could probably do it all on one line if we needed, but then everything's jumbled together. I really want to explain this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another variable, and I'm going to call it pot val 2, twice my potentiometer value. And what am I going to do to get this? I have to take my original potentiometer value and I multiply it by 2. So stored in here is my potentiometer value. Stored in here is going to be twice that because I multiplied it by 2 here and assigned it into here. Last thing I need to do inside of here is I need to say what value I want to send back to my loop or wherever I've called this function. So to do that, all I do is I write the word return and then put the variable name that I want to return. This is the entire function. There are only 2 differences in this function from the non-returning ones, the ones that we did where it just does something. The very first difference is this isn't a void. It has to be a type that can hold something. And secondly, I have this line here where I say return something. What do I want to return? I want to return my value that's stored in here. And why do I have to tell it which value to return? Well, I could just return that value. I could return that value. But I don't want to return those. I want to return twice my potentiometer value, which is stored here. Now I said there are two differences here, which is true, but there's one more difference in general that you have to do when you're writing this function. And that's exactly what we do when we have to save data with a function. Wherever I call this function and I plug in a value, this here will equal twice my potentiometer value. It'll jump down here, it'll do all this stuff, it will return the value up to here. But the problem is down here, if I want to write an if statement and say, well, if twice my potentiometer value is this, it doesn't know. It didn't store it anywhere. So the last thing I need to do is I need to make a spot to store this up here. It needs to take a value, needs to get my reading, do all this stuff, and whatever this ends up equaling, it needs to send that into space in memory that the loop can access later. And that's it. Now we could take this a little bit further. Maybe instead of it just doubling, I could add a second one in here and call this how many times. I'm going to make this change, and then I'm going to let you just look at it for a second and try to figure out what this does now. I added a second input. I'll have to change something up here in a second. But go ahead and just look at this for a second, maybe pause it, take a look, and see if you can figure out what this function does now. All right, so I have this second one in here, and this second input is what I'm multiplying my original potentiometer value with. So instead of doubling it, I can do anything with it. I can multiply it by anything. If I put a 2 here, that would be doubling it. I'd be reading pin 0, right? This is pin 0. So I read pin 0, and I take that reading, and I multiply it by my second input, which is 2. And I return that back. I could multiply this by 5. I take a reading, save that value, take that value and multiply it by 5, save that value here, return that value to here, and before I forget everything, before I move on to my next line, I assign that value here so that I can use it later.